Thank you, Alison. She left. Thank you, Susanna, for the first two talks. And my talk will be on bridging the gap between formal and non-formal education, and how I think and we think the organization I am from, this would help with inclusive schools and would guide a way to a school of the 21st century. But let me begin with a picture of one of my favorite schools. When we started working in this field in 2007 in Berlin, we are a Berlin-based social enterprise working in a space very similar to this one here, not as nice as this one, but we're working on that too. This right here is the Bisalski Schule. It's called Bisalski School and is in the southwest of Berlin. And it's a school for kids with special needs. And my first school project there included to bring external partners, as you can see here, mostly companies, to the school and organize a vocational fair. So this is a fair for job orientation, where pupils can learn where they can work, where they can do internships, and where they can find a future in vocational training or even in jobs. And this school was named after a man who's on the next slide, and he was called Konrad Bisalski. He was a very famous orthopedist, a doctor, 100 years ago, who came up with a problem, or who came up with a solution he thought for a problem he saw. And that problem was that the state back then, 100 years ago, treated cripples, as they were called, with no respect and with no help. So there was no help for persons that were ill or disabled. And he came up with the idea and the thought that these persons should be helped, that they should be cured, that they were not really people that had no future, but that they were people who could be cured of their illness and could become citizens. And then in the end, of course, taxpayers. And what he did is, I think, could be a role model for what we would like to achieve in Germany today. He really helped to find a shift in paradigms, in which he helped to, like we see here, create new homes for disabled persons, where he treated them, where he helped them. And his famous words were that you not only treat a foot or an arm, but the whole person. So he had this way of looking holistically at pupils with disabilities back then. And in this kind of institutions we see on the right, the Oskar Heleneheim, one of the first institutions in Germany treating disabled persons in a holistic way. Doctors and teachers shared the work. So they were working as a team, as team members on the same level. And this is something I would like to keep you in mind for later. So my talk about bridging the gap will introduce you very shortly to the history of inclusion in Germany, and then in the second part on the current state of inclusion in Germany, in schools of course, and give you all the relevant numbers and the current situation right now. And then the third part, and the most important part for me, is the inclusive school of the 21st century as we see it, and the ways we would like to help develop such a school. But let me begin with the history. I'm a trained history teacher, so beware. In the 19th century and the early 20th century, there was no inclusion whatsoever. The state was exclusion, as you can all imagine. So people with handicaps, disabled persons were excluded from the rest of society. They weren't trained, they were degraded and even killed. This went over to a state of separation, where they started, like Konrad Bisalski, where they started to treat disabled persons, but in special institutions. So you separated the ill people from the healthy people, from the normal people, as you all are familiar with, I see. Then in 1880, the first special school, with the help of Konrad Bisalski, opened in Germany and really laid the base for a growing number of special schools all over Germany, and to really brought that idea forward that you should treat disabled persons together, or not together, but that you should train and focus on disabled persons too. And this led up to the 1920 Prussian law for cripples' welfare, as it was called, and that combined for the first time the three ideas of treatment, education, and, very important, vocational training for people with disabilities. And at these kind of institutions, teachers and doctors really worked as partners and worked together within one group. So also something like a role model. Then, of course, being a history teacher, this seems to me also very important, even especially in the light of the elections last weekend in Germany. So just a little hint where all this bullshit can lead to. We had the 90s and 40s where the ideas of the Enlightenment were really perverted by the National Socialists in Germany and all over Europe. They created a machine of mass murder. And I will just only point out what exclusion and separation can lead to when you think of money and when you think of people believing in that. I will just shortly translate this. This is a publication of the NSDAP claiming that every ill person costs such and such many Reichsmark, and that everyone should think about why we should spend money on ill persons. And if you go this path, and if you try then start and think in terms of money and how much it costs to bring people back into society or to take care of them, then you go your way to something that all of you know what I mean. I skip that and then come to a phase after World War II, where we had a very short period after the war because of the great need, where all the pupils were educated together in the same school, but that was only due to the great need, and this short period then ended. And it ended because we had very active parents that created a protected space for their disabled children, and this allowed a growth of special schools from 2% to 5% of all schools from 1950 to 1970. So what the parents tried to achieve was, of course, to create a protected space for children with disabilities in order to protect them, and in the light, of course, of what happened in the 30s and 40s. So they wanted to create a special atmosphere. Later on, so in the 1970s, we had a real and a huge, and this is still existing, and the Bisalski school I showed you in the beginning is also one example of this. We had a whole system of ambulant institutions, like special kindergartens, special schools, and special workshops where people work that have certain disabilities, and they create like boxes or wrappage and stuff like that. And all this led in the 70s and then early 80s to the recognition that you had it, that you separate them, and then after that you have to integrate them back into the system. And this should change. So in 1981, there was one first, very important, as we see it in Germany, step when the United Nations proclaimed the International Year of the Handicapped Persons in 81, as I said. And that was one of the paths that led to the 1994 Salamanca Declaration, where 92 governments and 25 international organizations said that inclusion is the most important factor in education. So this is something all these governments, the German and the Czech government too, agreed on and put onto paper. Again, and the history lesson is almost over, this led to something brought to us by the United Nations when in 2006, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was ratified by the United Nations, and then 1 year later in Germany, in the Czech Republic also, and is now German law. And it says also that inclusion is the most important factor in education. Something that is very crucial too is the WHO and the World Bank report on disability, who claims that 15% of mankind right now are disabled. So 15% of us sitting here have one form or another of a disability. And that means that right now we are talking about 1 billion people on the planet. That number is 50% higher as in 1970, which is also due to changing diagnostical standards and new views on disabilities. And what the World Report pointed out was that there is a large need for a sustainable environment for inclusion that should be implemented on a national level with national action plans and should really be brought down to the schools. So to wrap it up, this first part, I will quote something from the World Report on Disability that pointed out, really to bring it down on the national level, appropriate training of mainstream teachers, talking about teachers, appropriate training of mainstream teachers can improve teacher confidence and skills in educating children with disabilities. The principles of inclusion should be built into teacher training programs and accompanied by other initiatives that provide teachers with opportunities to share expertise and experience about inclusive education. End of part one. That really showed you where it all came from, because, and I showed you that it is something like a top-down way inclusion went in Germany, at least. We had these different waves and impulses of inclusion. We had this, the big try to protect disabled and disadvantaged people because of the horrors of the past, and then it really trickled down to the second lowest level in this system, which are the teachers, just one level above those who should be really talked to, which are the pupils, of course. Part two, inclusion in Germany today. What do we talk about when we talk about inclusion in Germany? There's a big debate going on the differences between integration and inclusion, and there's always the fear that we Germans are trying to make something of a semantic lesson out of it, but we think really that it is a very important difference between the two concepts. Although in the 80s, many would argue that integration was used in the same terms as we use inclusion today. But the main difference is that, I hope you can see it in the first, on the first picture, that in integration we talk about bringing back something that has a certain form or a color into the big one, into the big circle here, and then it stays together as a group, and it's still recognizable as a group. So you bring something in that you first defined as different and as a certain group, and then you bring it in. Whereas inclusion, as we talk about it in Germany today, means that everybody has strengths and everybody has weaknesses, and you wouldn't group them together, so you wouldn't even say there are some kids with special needs when you brought it to the extreme, and you wouldn't define certain groups that need certain help. So this is just a little hint at the big translation war we had going on, because the first version of the translation of the United Nations Convention had integration in it, and then there was a big upheaval in Germany where they changed the translation, and now it says inclusion. Okay, and all these top-down solutions are now meeting reality in Germany. I don't know how familiar you are with the German states. We have 16 different states, and bringing education from the United Nations, you have 10? You have 10, okay. And bringing these laws from the United Nations all the way up into the schools would need to pass this system of education, because in Germany education is in the realm of the different states. So once you have this national law, it does not mean by any sense that it is implemented in a school, because the schools are always looking to their own states. And that's why I put in the 16 ministries that behave very differently and are not, very often not able to work together. In 2014 we had 500,500 pupils with special needs in Germany. 500,000 pupils have special needs in one form or another. That are 6.8% of all. And just to show you the differences, in Lower Saxony, which is this state, there are 5.3% of the pupils diagnosed with special needs, whereas in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, up in the north, there are 11% of the pupils are diagnosed with special needs. And this, of course, is due to a different set of diagnostical standards within the states, because these are also following state law. I put this here on this chart, and I will help you to probably read it a little bit better. So The big column gives you the number of pupils that need special education in one form or another. And of those, so here's Germany, of those 6.8% of German pupils needing special attention, 2.1% are included. That means they attend a regular school. And 4.7% are not included in regular schools, but are going to schools for special needs. They are excluded, actually. So now, but looking at the states, the picture differs very much. Where we have in Bremen, I don't know if it's on the next chart. All right, give it to you this way. In Bremen, 68.5% are attending regular schools, whereas in Hesch, so down, a little bit down, only 21% are attending regular schools. So there's a system which differs, and this is all I wanted to say. And the numbers are showing you that we really have one big problem, and that is the cooperation between the states, and that all states are dealing different with the question of how to include their people. This is really, I would say, one of the first, or the first major problem in Germany. And the second one, obviously, is that whereas we had in 2008, when the United Nations Convention was ratified, we had 5% excluded in Germany, 5% of the pupils were excluded. We now still have 5% excluded, but in 2001, we had only 4.5% of the pupils excluded, so that means the numbers of the excluded pupils are going up because more and more children are diagnosed with special needs. So it doesn't help just to enforce it or just to make a national law, but you really have to look at the diagnostical standards too. Then we have a differentiation along the educational career, which is really the second big problem right now in Germany. When we deal with inclusion, we are talking about very different numbers of included organizations and institutions. Whereas we have 2/3 of all kindergartens, so 67% of all kindergartens are inclusive. We only have 1/2 of all elementary schools that are really inclusive. So 50% of the elementary schools are inclusive, and then we only have 33% of the secondary schools that are inclusive right now. The higher you come in the educational hierarchy, or the higher you climb in your educational career, the harder it gets to be an inclusive school. We don't know really why that is. Working on this. Then let me very quick to come to the parents before I come to the teachers. So really the people really at the bottom in this idea and in this scenery. In all questions, when you ask parents that kid is going to an inclusive school, compared to asking parents whose kids are not going to an inclusive school, parents are saying that they feel better about their kids being in an inclusive school than parents feel about their kids being in a non-inclusive school. This goes especially for the question of how they like the teachers in the school, because one of the questions and two of the questions are about are the teachers working in teams? Are they open to your critiques? Are they open to your influence? And how much are the teachers accepted by yourself? So this really shows that teachers in inclusive school are much more accepted with the parents. So, as I tried to demonstrate, there's a lot of United Nations Conventions, Salamanca Declaration, national laws, WHO reports, and this comes to the teacher. Very high expectations from society saying that the teacher is to solve all these problems, saying he is to include children with special needs, handicapped people, children with learning disabilities, ever faster changing demands of what they should really achieve with the children, and this leads to a very high rate of occupational burnout. We have the tendency of burnout rates going up to 60%. So 60% of all teachers in Germany are facing the burnout syndrome. Shouldn't there be a change? soon. So, and this brings me to the last part, and this is also the shortest. I put something on there that you all might know. It takes a village to raise a child. This is an old African saying I heard, and this is true today. It needs external partners to really help to make a good inclusive school working. We need multi-professional teams of teachers where really 2, 3, or even 4 adults are in the classroom helping the kids with special needs and helping everybody in the concept of inclusion. And what we especially need is a continuing professional development for teachers, training them, facing the newest problems we want them to solve. This is something we came up in Germany. This is not just to advertise it, but just to give you an idea how you can help schools. This is something that is called Schule Plus. It's an online network really for teachers, where teachers can find external help. So they can just put their requests in there and say, we need something, who would voluntarily like to read to our children, helping them in the afternoon, or we need a big organization or a funding for our school, we need money, and so they can put it up on their own billboard, blackboard, and find the help they need. And then to wrap it up, what the inclusive school of the 21st century really needs is a more practical initial teacher training and education, and a guided induction, a long phase of guided induction from teachers that are there in schools already, that guide the new teachers into their job. We need better teacher development, and we really need school teams. And there's this one idea coming from the Netherlands of Jelma Evers, who is claiming that flipping the system is something that should happen everywhere, that we don't look at the United Nations or national laws, but that we ask the teachers, ask people like Alison what they really need in their schools, and then give it to them. Thank you very much.